Welcome back, everyone. I finally returned after my big move and a bunch of home renovations, so now I can finally start reposting on this channel. So today I wanted to talk about Yoma sabina, which is a large nymphalid butterfly which was recently intercepted in Fiji, of all places, and this paper was just recently published called Colonization of the Fiji Islands by the Lurcher, Yoma sabina. And Yoma sabina is a butterfly that is typically considered native to Australia, but is found throughout Southeast Asia and then across various Pacific islands. This particular butterfly is fairly mobile. In fact, it's been intercepted as far northwest as the Himalayas, so it is a bit of a traveler. And this here is what Yoma sabina looks like. So it's fairly large. Its top wings are very brightly colored, although its bottom wings are cryptic, which helps with hiding. But the Australian lurcher is a very easily identifiable sort of creature. And this is interesting because it seems to have randomly shown up in Fiji, very unexpectedly. The nearest island inhabited is some 500 miles away, so it's not exactly a short trip to get to Fiji. And as far as researchers had known, with the fauna of Fiji, just recently, they had a series of surveys documenting the various creatures there in 2017, 2018, and 2019, and this particular butterfly was not found. And like I said, it's fairly large, it's fairly easy to spot, and now there seems to be a fairly large population of these butterflies in Fiji. So what exactly is going on? This map here is from the article. The butterflies were found all over the islands that make up Fiji, so it's not just one little local population. This is an island chain-wide, archipelago-wide infestation, or now new range for this butterfly, for Yoma sabina. Yoma is interesting in that there are only 2 species known within this genus. However, there are lots and lots of subspecies within the 2 species known, so it isn't yet determined which subspecies this is that has infested the islands of Fiji. So it's not yet known if this has spread from the nearest island of Vanuatu, but it's entirely likely that that's where it's come from, but it's possible that this has traveled from much farther away. Fairly little is known about Yoma caterpillars in general. However, they have a fairly typical nymphalid life cycle, and they tend to feed on acanthus sorts of plants, Acanthaceae, but it's entirely possible that they feed on more things than that. But what's interesting about this particular traveling butterfly is that it tends to expand its range fairly easily, even within the areas that it is known in. In Australia, where this is a fairly widespread butterfly, it has actively spread its range north and south as its host plants have also spread. So it's not like it's a particularly rare, limiting sort of butterfly. Additionally, there are many color morphs of Yoma sabina, so it can be fairly difficult to identify. They're generally identified via the male genitalia, but the wing patterns themselves are highly variable, so you can't necessarily trust that you have Yoma sabina just because you think it's Yoma sabina. It could be a different Yoma species or the one other Yoma species, and because of this variability, it can be difficult to determine what subspecies you're dealing with. How did Yoma sabina get to Fiji? Like I said, the nearest island inhabited is some 500 miles away, and there's no good evidence that this was actually introduced by people. Like I said, there were very recent surveys done in 2017 through 2019, and this butterfly was not found. And because of the very high tourist presence in Fiji, it is likely that someone would have noticed this butterfly before. So it's entirely likely that this butterfly showed up just within the last year or two. And this, although it has just showed up, it already has a very large population. So it's not likely that it was a human introduction where it was, one caterpillar showed up via transport or just a couple butterflies. You already have a very large population. So it's likely that there was some sort of migration to the island. So then the question becomes, how exactly did it get to the island? Was this a storm island hopping event like what you see in the monarchs, which if you're in North America, you're probably extremely familiar with monarch butterflies. And I've talked about this a little bit on the channel before, but the monarchs are found throughout the Pacific Islands, as well as have a very large population in both Australia and New Zealand. And this was done via island hopping, primarily riding cyclones in the Pacific, hurricanes and cyclones in the Pacific. we know that butterflies can spread like that, but additionally, there are butterflies which fly very, very long distances, seemingly intentionally. So just recently published in Nature, the transoceanic flight of the painted lady butterflies, they basically flew from southern Europe to Africa and then across the entire Atlantic into South America, riding kind of the Sahara winds, before they were found on the coasts of South America. And generally speaking, the painted ladies are found on all continents except for South America and Antarctica. So this is the first known painted lady migration event into South America. So we know that butterflies can travel this way as well. So what exactly has happened with Yoma sabina? We're still trying to figure that out, but it is an interesting example of island biogeography and how species move between very isolated land masses, and what these sorts of colonization and invasion events look like, kind of, quote unquote, naturally occurring. These are sort of occurring all the time, and it's just easier for us to see when it occurs on an island because we generally know kind of the limits of the biodiversity of specific islands, especially something like Fiji, which is extremely well documented. And with that, I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks a lot. Like and subscribe.